Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another Home Theater Hangout with yours truly. We are joined once again by John from Trinnov Audio. How's it going, John?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. I'm here in our training theater and uh, in a comfy chair for a change.
Awesome. Yeah, just don't fall asleep because I've
I'll
been in
try
those
not to.
chairs. So, the big news with you guys is that recently you have shown off the brand new Trinnov Altitude CI, which stands for what?
Custom integration.
So,
And
is this for
mhm,
normal folks since it's CI?
not really. At least, certainly, that's not the intention. Um, we wanted to create a version of the altitude that is um, very specifically designed to include all the things that custom integrators need to be able to do what they do. And, along the way, we made it easy enough to use that I'm sure some people will wind up buying it who might actually be better off with a 16 or a 32.
Hmm.
But, it's going to happen. And I addressed that in the little presentation that I put together.
All right.
Um, and I also, what I'm hoping is that we can get through the death by PowerPoint as quickly as possible so that I can actually give you a live demo of
Nice.
what the new user interface is like.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. By the way, if you guys do have any questions for John while he is on, be sure to drop them in the comment section, and then we'll get to it at the end of John's presentation. So don't keep your questions till the end. Drop them in there now so that they'll be ready to go when John is done. So let's bring up your presentation here. Swap that around. All right, let's go.
Okay. All right. So, oops, I need to. There we go. So this is what's on deck for today. We'll touch on a little bit of altitude history for anybody who maybe isn't that familiar with it, so they can see where the CI came from. But we'll spend the bulk of the time during the presentation on the CI itself, and including, some applications you might not have thought about. And then we'll briefly touch on why you might choose, this altitude versus that altitude. And finally, we'll get rid of the presentation so that I can do a quick demo of the new user interface, which is premiering on the CI, but will also come to the Altitude 16 and 32 as a free software update in a few months.
Nice.
So, quick backgrounder for anyone who's not particularly familiar with the Altitude and what it's done over the years. The Altitude 32 was introduced a little over 11 years ago at CEDIA 2014, so beginning of September 2014. It's won more awards than any other surround processor and is routinely specified for the world's best theater projects, whether those projects are huge and impressive or small and intimate. If you'd like to hear more about how the altitude changed the way content is both created and then subsequently played back, please check out our YouTube channel because there are a lot of interviews there, including both custom integrators and also recording industry professionals who talk about our technology and how it's changed both what they do and how they work. Um, Briefly, this Altitude CI is not a brand new endeavor. It comes from a proven award winning platform, which has quite a long track record for excellence and regular updates. And in fact, even those very first Altitude 32s from 11 years ago are still in use. We have serial number one in our R&D lab, and it runs the same software that newly built altitudes get as they come off the production line. So uh, this is not coming out of nowhere. Um,
Yeah.
we have over 50 patents for technologies that we developed ourselves. The best known technologies are the ones listed on the slide, but there are others. And the point is, we're not just buying off the shelf parts and assemblies and sort of gluing them together to come up with a product. Um, we do fundamental research and quite a lot of it and develop entirely new technologies that have never been done before. Um, no other range of surround processors can make that claim. Everybody else is using off-the-shelf chips and boards and things like that. Another nice thing about the fact that we are doing everything ourselves is that you don't have to jump back and forth between different applications while you're setting up and calibrating the system. Everything you need is in the Altitude all by itself. The only thing you might use a laptop for is just, it's a little bit more convenient than hooking up a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor to the Altitude itself, which you could also do. But we usually use, VNC to log in remotely, and that's what you're seeing here. Um, Over the years, most surround processors are just a dealer wants to refer to them in front of me as home theater consumables, and I hadn't thought of it in quite those terms, but he was right. Every few years, you have to toss out what you own and start all over again just to stay current with the changing technologies. By contrast, the Altitude platform has been kept up to date all along without even having to be removed from the rack by and large. It's been a model of sustainability. And there are times when new hardware is required, mostly HDMI, 1.4, 2.0, 2.1. Um, the modular hardware design makes it pretty easy to swap out a single board and do a software update rather than having to buy a whole new processor and starting over. We've been doing this for quite some time now, enhancing the value of what I think is an already terrific product by making all of our Altitude software updates free. Many of these updates introduce entirely new features and capabilities, including new decoders and new up mixers and you name it. Things that might not have even been imagined when we first designed the product. And in fact, because it's a software update, we don't have to wait for Texas Instruments or Analog Devices or somebody to come up with a new chip. We can usually get that cool new technology to our customers uh, a year and a half or 2 years before our competitors do. So in a world full of sort of short life cycle, almost disposable AV gear, the Altitude platform offers really lasting value. The power of that software-based platform allows us to do things that nobody else can. Um, Sustainability is real important to us, and I think we've demonstrated that we can do that. So that's the history about the CI. Uh, Over the years, I have seen a lot of altitudes that have been relegated to an equipment room uh, that the owner rarely, if ever, even sees. It might be on the other side of the basement or whatever. It's it seemed to me kind of a shame to spend money on a nice faceplate and knobs and buttons and all this stuff that in so many cases were never used. And so we started thinking about what an altitude that was completely focused on custom integration would look like. Um, on a related note, and this is just part of that focus, audio over IP has been around for quite some time. Dante, for example, was invented in 2006. We've supported audio over IP in our recording studio products since 2018, so it's not new. It's also not required very often in the residential market, um, but we imagine that it will become more important over time, particularly in the DCI world. And if you don't know what DCI is about, these uber high-end screening rooms typically use commercial cinema Dolby processors, which are capable of decoding as many as 64 unique channels from the pro version of Dolby Atmos, and which is normally only available in theaters. We asked Dolby to let us do it, but they won't. They like selling their hardware, which makes complete sense. So while there aren't a lot of those systems being done, it does seem to be growing. And DCI systems are extremely complex and usually really expensive. And we thought a product that simplified the design of those kind of hybrid pro and consumer systems that would not only make it simpler to design but less expensive to implement would be a winning combination. So that's where we come from. Uh, having Is there a question?
Yeah, so will this
Okay, yeah.
playback DCI files,
No,
audio?
the way DCI works is that you normally would have Dolby CP950 or an IMS 3000
Mhm.
integrated media server. The IMS 3000 is a board and a hard drive that slides into a slot on a projector, typically.
Yep.
And the CP950 is a standalone box. And those are really the only products that can decode Dolby Atmos for commercial cinema,
Right.
which can go all the way up to 64 channels instead of 32. Now, that's why there aren't a lot of DCI theaters in part. I mean, how many people need to have that many speakers in their room? And the other part is that it's just crazy expensive.
Yep.
Um, I was in a DCI theater a few months back, and the owner of the home had gotten a new movie that was still in theaters
Yeah.
and had downloaded it. And if I remember right, he was spending $2,000 or $3,000
Wow.
in order to rent this movie for what amounted to 48 hours.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's just not something that most of us can do.
Yeah.
Um, but it used to be solely for people who were in the business, like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and people who are involved in making the content. And nowadays, it seems like if you have enough money and want to spend it, you can pretty much get it
Yeah.
at this point. But
Yeah.
it's a whole different level of complexity. Typically, we've done a lot to make that way simpler than it might otherwise be.
Right. Right. Right.
For example, in what we believe is the first time it's ever happened by anybody, including the pro business, not just residential stuff. We have included both fully native Dante and fully native AES 67 in the CI. And even better, you can mix and match as required by the other components in the system, right up to the current maximum of 32 channels. So you can do 32 channels of AES EBU, which is normal kind of balanced digital, both input and output. You can do Dante or AS67 or some combination of the two, and both inputs and outputs, and do whatever you need to do based on everything else that's in the system.
What's the difference between those?
So Dante and AES67 are both audio over IP systems that instead of using analog XLR cables or something like that to get the signal from one place to the next, they use something that's very much like your local area network at home, your Ethernet kind of network. There are a few requirements in order for that to work well, but it's you have basically a single RJ45, Cat 6 kind of cable going between the Altitude CI and one or more power amplifiers. And they get converted to analog in the power amp, and everything's distributed by, the network. So you can do as many channels as you want on one skinny little wire. It's pretty amazing.
Nice. Okay.
So, pursuant to that, we actually have included not one, not two, but three network ports, and we've designed them to support a variety of possible configurations. We have what um, we believe is a unique no network option for smaller and simpler systems. And at the other end of the scale, the CI is was very much designed for and is at home with the most complicated systems involving managed switches and your choice of either RJ45 Ethernet ports that probably everybody's familiar with, or newer fiber optic network ports. The network connections number 2 and 3 are SFP cages, which most folks probably haven't run across, but it's waiting for you to insert a little module into it, and those modules can set you up to use either a normal RJ45 electrical kind of network connection or that fiber optic connection for the network. So you just pick what you need and plug it in. Audio over IP also was not an afterthought when we were designing the CI. It was a core architectural foundation that was the entire reason we were designing the product. So the most common use, for those systems where both AES67 and Dante are being used, will probably be in one of those DCI theaters that I was talking about, because the Dolby products only talk AES67, and AS67 was designed originally sort of by committee. It's an open standard of the industry, and as such, it was, to a degree, it was designed to be all things to all people. And as a result, there's a lot more configuration that you need to be on top of, because it can do almost anything. You have to tell it what it is that you need to do, and if once it's configured, it works great. By comparison, Dante is, it's sort of like comparing the Mac OS to DOS in the old days. Instead of everything being a manual, pull your hair out kind of project, Dante will, as soon as you power up the application, will find everything on your network that knows how to speak Dante and give you a list of things to choose from. And it literally is as easy as saying, I want this to go there and that to go here, and you're done. And you can do some really sophisticated, complex networking stuff that would just not be practical using XLRs, for example. Um, so it's, the CI is more than ready for modern audio over IP systems right out of the box. It's not like audio over IP was bolted on after the fact, but rather is a really flexible and scalable solution for this kind of system. Now, while we were at it, we redesigned the Altitude user interface to deliver great results easily and faster, while still maintaining all those expert level controls and keeping them available when needed. But the goal was to make sure that everything was nice and simple and straightforward. And on those relatively rare occasions when you need one of the more advanced features, the relevant advanced feature would just be one click away. So one word of caution, however. By the way, the same user interface will be available to current Altitude owners early next year sometime, as another free software update. But one word of caution, unlike every other software update I can remember in the 10 years or so that I've been with Trinnov, um, this one will require starting all over again in terms of setup. So, you'll have to reconfigure and recalibrate, remeasure, all that, because the update is not just a pretty face on the same old software. We've rewritten significant chunks of the underlying code, and the data structures are different, which is why you have to start from a clean slate.
Right.
Um,
But John, that's the fun part is doing the calibration.
well, some of us enjoy it, but not everyone is as kinky as you and me. So next year, we'll also offer sort of a beefed up version of the CI that has a bigger CPU and bigger Dante board and so forth.
Right,
It
right,
can
right.
scale all the way up to 64 channels,
The 64.
and all in the same box. The 32 channel models will be capable of being upgraded to the 64 channel version if somebody wants to do that, but it will require a trip back to Paris for the upgrade.
Huh. Okay.
So, because it's a bit of a remanufacture at that point.
Got you.
Um, but whether you're doing a 5.1 or a 64 channel theater, the interface remains the same and it's consistent as of next year when it comes out for the 16 and 32. It'll be consistent across all of the Altitude models. So
So is that new one, is that going to be the equivalent of adding the 48 EXT to the 32?
in yes, it's not exactly equivalent because the 48 EXT gives you, combined with an Altitude 32, it gives you the access to as many as 64 analog outputs. The CI
Hmm.
only has digital outputs, with one exception that I'll get to in a minute. Um, yeah, but the idea, and this is, partly for our dealers and not just for end users, but we wanted to make sure that there was almost no learning curve necessary, and you can just be confident doing what you're doing. Um, we also took the opportunity to create a new microphone, which I happen to have one of here, and it'll look quite familiar to anyone who's familiar with our 3D microphones. Um, in point of fact, it has the exact same performance as the current version 9 microphone that most people on watching this are familiar with. This is version 10. The main thing that's different is in the bass, not in the actual microphones. First of all, the microphone calibration file that is now actually stored in the base itself rather than on a USB stick that you could lose. And when it's connected to the CI, that calibration file is automatically downloaded into the CI. So it's not a separate process that you have to do anymore. And it also, the other big change is that unlike the V9 microphone that has a 9-volt battery in here for powering the four microphone preamps that are in the base, this is phantom powered from the CI. So A, your battery can never run out of power, and B, the CI has complete control over whether the mic is on or off because it just provides power when it's necessary to have the mic and gets rid of the power when it's not needed and could be potentially dangerous if you did the right combination of selecting the mic input and turning the mic on and not muting the system and suddenly you've created a feedback loop.
I've never
So
done that before.
yeah, most of us have done it twice. Very few of us have done it more than twice. Most of us have done it once. Very few of us have done it twice. Um, so to be clear, because this has already come up, the connection between the Altitude CI and the version 10 microphone, it looks from this angle, it looks like an XLR plug,
Mm,
but it's actually what's called an EtherCon connection. There's an RJ45 that actually makes the connections on the inside.
gotcha.
It's not a network connection. It's still transmitting analog microphone information from the mic to the CI, but it is using that kind of connector and more wires, basically.
What
Um,
length does that come with? Cable.
Standard is 10 meters, just like the current microphones, and we'll have a longer, probably 40-meter version available as well. We're still determining how long you can go before it begins to degrade.
Is there is that microphone enhanced in any way over the original one?
Only in the ways that I just mentioned.
Okay,
Different kind of connector, downloadable calibration files right in the microphone so you can't lose them, and remote power from the CI.
and you cannot
Those,
use that one with the 1632. Okay,
they lack the right kind of connector,
got it.
and so you'll get identical results on 16 and 32s with the existing mics because it's not an improvement of the mic itself.
Yeah,
It's just changing the way we connect to the mic.
gotcha.
So, um, the Altitude CI's focus on custom integration is especially noticeable when it comes to controllability for, I'm not even, is that a word? But, when it comes to being able to control it from something else. One note for anyone who owns an Altitude 16 or a 32, if you haven't already, please download and use our free Trinnov apps that are, I'm sorry, I'm pointing it. I have my presentation on a big screen up here. The Trinnov app that's mentioned on the slide, please download that. There are two apps for phones and iPads. There's one for the iOS, one for Android. And then there are two other versions of the app for laptops, one for Windows, one for Macs. The phone based, or in the case of Apple, iPad based apps are basically the best remote controls you've ever used. I mean, they're really terrific to the point where I have no idea why we even include the infrared remote in the box anymore. I never touch it. I always use my phone.
Yeah,
And then the desktop app gives you full access to the user interface, which you'll see a little bit later. And it's all again, it's a little bit like Dante in this regard. It automatically, when you power, when you launch the app, it'll search your local area network for any Trinnov products that are available and give you a list of anything that might be available, and you just click on the one that you want, and boom, you've got the connection. So you don't have to understand anything about uh, you know VNCs or special interfaces. Um, And then finally, I mean, people can read the slide on their own, but the one other thing I thought I would touch on here is, a lot of people on the podcast probably know that we can log in remotely to your unit to answer questions or help in some other way. As an update, we're also now sharing that capability with all of your dealers. So For example, if you decide after living with a product for a little while, you decide you want more of this or less of that or whatever, you can call your dealer up. He can log in remotely and make those changes from his desk without having to roll a truck or without having to charge you for a service call, which I think is pretty spectacular. The Amplitude 16 is known by at least some of the folks on this call. It was designed originally with the CI in mind. We couldn't talk about the CI at the time because it wasn't done, but some of you might remember seeing the metal cover over the back, over the optional Dante input board slot on the backside of the preamp. That board is now available and eliminates the need for the XLR to DB25 breakout cables. Again, one good quality network wire will carry all 16 channels to the amplifier.
How much does that upgrade cost?
The upgraded the optional board.
Yeah.
I think if I remember right, I think it's $900.
Oh, that's not bad.
Um, it we
Yeah.
Well, given that it has 16 channels of D-Day conversion on it,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's basically our cost.
Yeah.
We didn't want to burden the bill of materials of every amplifier with this stuff that only some people would use, but we definitely wanted to make sure that if you needed it or wanted it, it was eminently accessible.
Is that
We
user installable?
I don't think we really decided yet. It if you just sort of cram it into the slot, it is possible to damage things. So you need to be a little bit
Gotcha.
gentle
Yeah.
with it. And probably the best thing to do would be to take the top cover off, and so you could actually watch yourself as you're inserting it into the slot and it's
Right.
making all the connections. Um, uh, and that's why it may not be user installable, because there are dangerous voltages and currents on the inside of the box. And our dealers are used to that and have to deal with it all the time. But I don't want the liability of somebody getting hurt because they casually brush their hand against, a
Right. Yeah.
power supply. Um, Now, I should also mention, because this is a point of some confusion already, um, just a word about keeping the signal digital all the way to the amplifier, which is what audio over IP does. Doing that is not inherently better. It's just different. It simply moves the absolutely necessary D-Day conversion stage from the preamp into the power amp. And contrary to popular thinking, Class D amplifiers are not digital. D was simply the next letter after A, B, and C. Class A amplifiers, Class B amplifiers, Class AB amplifiers, somewhere in between, Class C amplifiers, and now Class D amplifiers. Class D amplifiers require an analog signal to work. They use pulse width modulation, which seems sort of digital, but it's an analog signal that controls that PWM. So we're moving the D-Day conversion from here to there. We use the same chips, we use the same output buffers, we did everything we needed to do so that the quality would be the same. Um, but don't assume that it's better just because it's digital from here to there. It's just a different way of doing it. And did you have a question?
So could using your own, say you already have the Amplitude 16, you just bought a CI. You're like, I don't want to do this $900 update, but I just want to use my own DACs. Is there the possibility of having better audio using your own DAC rather than purchasing the optional board?
Well, first of all, and I think I may have confused myself and skipped over this. When we were designing the CI, we were originally designing it just for custom integration, and it was going to be all digital. And then someone pointed out that, most of these systems are going to have subwoofers, and I can't think of any subwoofers that know how to speak Dante or AS67. There probably are some by now, but they're pretty uncommon. So we decided to put in 8 channels of D-Day conversion in the CI. And they're not limited to subwoofer use. You could use them for anything. So up to 8 channels, you don't even have to buy any external DACs. We take care of that for you. If you wanted to buy external DACs in an effort to try to make it sound even better, be my guest. We do have the AES EBU outputs, which is what those DACs would need, and that's partly why they're there. But you're probably going to have to spend a lot of money to get better than what that board is going to cost you. If somebody has, and remember, depending on how many channels you're using, how many DACs do you want to have to buy and find space for and wire up? And
Yeah.
I don't think it's a very practical option, but it is a possible option. Um, let's see,
Now
where
we know.
was I? I have to look at the screen again. Um, because this is a Trinnov altitude, like all the other altitudes, you can take advantage of the highest channel count offered by each of the various decoders within the limitations of how many channels your particular altitude has. Those choices really need to be controlled by the room's design and not by somewhat arbitrary decisions made by some chip manufacturer. Um, doing it the way we do it, where for example, all 34.1 channels of Dolby Atmos for the home are available, and it's just a matter of you choosing the ones that make sense for where your speakers are. You know, our default settings are the ones that most people use, so it's pretty straightforward. But having the option to customize things can solve problems that would be challenging otherwise. And of course, since it's an altitude, it includes all of our proprietary technologies like the optimizer and remapping and waveforming and so on and so forth. The combination of these two for relatively simple systems, I think, is really special. And then combining the CI with multiple AMP16s for larger systems opens up a bunch of new possibilities. And we'll get to that a little bit later.
Mhm.
But what probably everybody's wondering is, how much does the darn thing cost? So they all look like that, but there are actually 13 different models. The hardware is exactly the same. The base model includes those 8 channels that you can use in any combination of analog, AES EBU, Dante, or AES67, and it's $11,000 MSRP.
Mm.
From there, you can add digital input and output channels 2 at a time for $12.50 per pair. So a fully loaded 32 channel in, 32 channel out capable box will retail for 26,000, which is significantly less than the comparable Altitude 32. But you do have to remember that you're going to have to buy probably new audio over IP enabled power amplifiers and other things. So before you leap to the conclusion that this is, a screaming deal,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it kind of is a screaming deal, but do your math, do a
Yeah.
little bit of homework, and make sure that you're ready to do what you got to do right at when you have to do it.
How much is the
So
Amplitude 16, the new one?
it's the same Amplitude 16 that we've had for I don't know, a couple of years now.
Well, with
It
the
just
installed
has
board.
the new board. I don't know if we're going to sell it pre-installed. We probably should, just to
Oh,
avoid
okay.
customers having to do that.
Yeah.
But so that it would be around a little over $14,000,
Okay.
including the board.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we designed this thing to be incredibly flexible when it comes to networking. And I understand that most of the folks here are probably not in the IT business, and God knows I'm not. I have learned what I need to know, but I am not a network engineer. Um, but the network capabilities of the CI are varied and really powerful. Um, One thing you need to know is that audio over IP, whether it's Dante or AS67, it needs to be kept separate from the more general traffic on your local area network to make sure there aren't these data collisions that might cause an audio dropout or other problems. Now, because we knew that not every person installing one of these things was going to be a network engineer, we've made doing that, at least in modest systems, pretty darn easy. Um, I'll just give you an idea of what we believe are the 3 most common ways of connecting the CI to an Amplitude 16, for example. And it doesn't have to be an Amplitude 16. It could be any Dante or AS67 enabled power amplifier. So the CI and the AMP16 can be connected by that single, simple Ethernet cable. And what this does is it creates its own little audio-only network. In effect, the Altitude CI and the Amplitude 16 have little network switches built into them already. And because they have that, they can talk to each other and understand what they need to do without having to use a bunch of complex networking stuff. We call this, that we did not invent this capability. This is just using publicly available network stuff. But in this combination, we call it direct link, just to give it a shorthand name. And it allows you to use Dante controller without having, a properly configured network otherwise. So it's, you have one wire that goes between Altitude CI and Amplitude 16, and a different wire that connects to the Amplitude 16 typically, but you could also do it to the amplifier, to the CI. And that does all of your configuration. So there's communication and then there's audio. Let's keep them separate.
Okay, so from CI, LAN cable to the Amplitude 16,
Mm-hmm.
and then one LAN cable from your modem or whatever, your router, into the CI.
Yes.
Because you got to control that somehow. Yeah.
Right. And when you're connecting your laptop just temporarily to configure and calibrate the CI, that will also be plugged into your normal Ethernet switch.
Right. Okay. So you don't need like a special router or something like that, like an audio only specific.
At this level, no. But let's go to the next level. If you need more than just one audio over IP amplifier, rather than daisy chaining them, we suggest that you consider isolating the audio from the rest of your local area network by literally keeping it on a whole separate, and in this case, it can be a dumb Ethernet switch.
Okay.
This way, the CI has access to however many amplifiers you need without creating additional latency that would be introduced by the hops from one thing to the next to the next. It's more of a star configuration instead of a circle kind of configuration. And the nice thing about this is that you can implement it without knowing anything about VLANs or QoS or any of the other network stuff that some of us have had to learn recently in late in life. So this is still pretty easy, and you don't need to have a fancy managed switch, but you do need to keep it separate from your normal internet traffic. And then finally, you can do what is normal for audio over IP, and that's using a managed switch, which is a lot more money and more complicated to create separate virtual LANs or VLANs to keep different kinds of traffic isolated from one another, and to use quality of service or QoS parameters to ensure that the audio data gets top priority, at least on the part of the network that is contains all your home theater gear. And if this looks confusing to you looking at this diagram, welcome to the club. I told you that this was designed primarily for custom integration, and they do understand all this kind of stuff because that's their
just by looking at this and knowing that we've got all kinds of data going back and forth, possibly something from your streaming Netflix or whatever could interfere somehow, some way. I know that's why you have a separate switch and all that, but it seems like rather than having a simple XLR cable, you have more opportunity for something to go to corrupt your audio to your amplifiers, etc.
That's probably fair. If you know what you're doing, there's no problem. But if you don't really understand networking, you could create a system pretty easily that will include things that you don't want, like audio drops. So in a larger, more sophisticated system, you probably want to get your friendly local dealer involved in this stuff. And I would argue that you want to do that anyway because they're the ones that do this, on a regular basis, and they're the ones that have come to our certification training and so on and so forth. But by the time you get to this level, don't try to do this yourself. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it looks looks like looks like it's a little convoluted there. I mean, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
probably easy once you do it a few times, but
Yeah, well, you can see here the yellow-orange kind of lines are what most of us would think of as our normal local area network. That's
yeah,
where the internet is, and that's how I connect my Apple TV to my Altitude, and or my Apple TV, excuse me, to the internet, so I can stream stuff. And then there's an HDMI cable that goes to the Altitude. Um, One of the reasons why you want to keep the blue connections separate from the yellow connections is that once you've decoded Dolby Atmos into however many PCM data streams are needed to make all of your speakers light up and do what they're going to do, that's a lot more bandwidth than the original Dolby Atmos bit stream that might have come from your Apple TV.
mm.
So that's when you need to keep them separate.
What if one of your switches goes down?
Well, it's going to go down. Yeah,
So
because
your
these
whole
are
thing is down.
network amplifiers.
Okay.
And you bring up a good point, because uh, most of the people on this call have at least some idea of how to troubleshoot analog connections, because they've been around in stereo equipment or even mono equipment forever.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a new thing. Um, Now, if you're if you're an IT professional and you understand managed switches and all of that stuff, then it's not unduly complicated. But I honestly, it's not something I would look forward to undertaking myself.
Yeah. Okay. So stick with my 32. That's what you're saying. Okay.
Well, 16 or 32 for
Yeah.
the CI has gotten a lot of attention. We introduced it at CEDIA, and already the forums and everything are kind of blowing up. And we've had other dealers, other manufacturers contact us, and it's creating quite a stir. But I think for a lot of people, the 16 and 32 still make more sense.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a case by case basis. You have to know what you're trying to accomplish.
Gotcha.
So, for example, because we have this base unit at $11,000 that has 8 channels. Um, and because we gave you 8 analog, balanced analog output channels, um, we can now do a 5.1 or a 7.1 system or a 5.1.2 system, or, anything up to 8 channels, um, for less money than we've ever been able to offer before. So it's great for smaller living room or media room systems that might be 7.1 or 5.1.2 or whatever, and for it's a tremendous value. Once you get past 8, that's when you start looking mostly at audio over IP, or possibly those AES EBU outputs. So let's look at a couple of cases just to give you an idea of what we're thinking of here. The 8-channel Altitude CI will be a fantastic preamp for the high-end stereo guy who wants to have the world's best room correction and wants to use waveforming, for example, to
Mm.
solve all of the bass problems, the standing wave problems in their high-end dedicated stereo listening room. So you could have either single amped or bi-amped main speakers and still have enough outputs for 4 subwoofers, which is the minimum for waveforming. And for a lot of rooms, it's all you need, unless your room is a little bit bigger than most. So you can, it brings a bunch of options to even just the high end stereo guy, that have not existed before. The closest thing would be our Amethyst preamp, but it only has 4 outputs. So you could do biamped 2.0, or you could do single amp 2.0, or you can do single amp 2.0 with 1 or 2 subwoofers. But it doesn't have enough capability to do waveforming because you need to have 4. And it also doesn't, you run out of outputs faster. So, um, so let's think about that living room or media room example, as opposed to the high-end stereo guy. Obviously, you can do a terrific 7.1 system with using either conventional amplifiers or powered speakers or an Amplitude 16 or whatever you want to use. If the channels are all bridged in the Amplitude 16, you'd have monster output capability and state-of-the-art processing, all in about exactly 5 RU of space. I've seen receivers bigger than that, but and without going into all the details, the upgrade paths are almost endless since you can add additional pairs of channel at any time as perhaps your needs grow. But you only have to buy what you need. So if you have an Altitude 32 right now and a 25 channel system, you have to buy a fully loaded Altitude 32 because it goes in increments of 8, 8, 16, 24, 32. In this case, you would have to have 26. So you might have one output that you're not using um, until you find a use for it. But you can upgrade quickly and easily, and you don't have to bring it anywhere. You're basically buying additional licenses, and the system can grow as your needs grow. So if we look at something that's closer to an Altitude 16 with the +4 software, so the Altitude 16 can actually do 20 channels. Um, so how about a somewhat more ambitious theater like a 9.4.6? The 20 channel version, which is 18,500, can handle that 9.4.6 system. So again, in case I'm using jargon here that people don't follow, it's 9 speakers at ear level, 4 subwoofers, and 6 speakers up above you. So the 20 channel version of this thing can handle that with or without waveforming, depending on what the room is doing and what you want to do, and without having to purchase any additional processing hardware. And it still only takes up 2 U of space. Obviously, you'll need more amplifiers or powered speakers or something. And once again, there are additional upgrade paths. When you do 9.4.6 and you decide you have 2 rows of seating, so you want to have the first, LS and RS next to the main listening position, and then you've got a back row and you want to have LS2, RS2 next to that, and then so that would be your 9 speakers because you're adding one extra pair of surrounds on top of a normal 7.1 layout. But then you get into it and you realize, there is this gap between the screen channels and the surround channels. That's what the wide speakers are supposed to fill. And so maybe, a year down the road, you decide to add those couple of speakers. And you don't have to chuck everything and start all over. You can just let the system grow as you grow.
Yeah.
And lots of upgrade paths. And then just to give you a ridiculous example, because I'm sure there are some people thinking 64 channels, who in his right mind? Well, a system like this should be enough to keep the Steven Spielbergs and George Lucases of the world happy. This uses all 64 channels. It's a lot. But it makes sense in a really big theater where you've got, maybe 4 or 5 rows of seating and it's a very wide room. But for most of us, this is just not necessary.
So I see that. Go back to that one.
Yeah.
So I see that you've doubled up on like RS, 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 RS2, RS2.
You caught it. Yeah. So the reason for that is that the real reason for having maybe as many as 64 speakers in the room in a giant room like this. The real reason is because you have a DCI theater that can actually, it's got the commercial cinema version of Dolby Atmos, and you're paying thousands of dollars just to watch a movie because you're a billionaire, and what else are you going to do with your money? So all those speakers can be addressed individually by the commercial version of Dolby Atmos. And you can either just not use a bunch of them when you're playing a Blu-ray or on your Kaleidoscape or something, or you can double up like this. And actually, you could do both by just having 2 different presets, one way, one the other way.
Yeah.
So you could pretty quickly and easily decide which way you thought was better.
All right. So let's say you do that, and you get one of those static mixes that's like 7.1.2.
7.1.2.
Yeah.
Hello, Disney. Yeah.
So obviously, when you double up on that, you're kind of just arraying them. So you'll kind of mirror the side surrounds. But at the same time, sometimes there's movies that are kind of static for the most part for like 80% of the time. But every once in a while, you'll get that one thing that zips
Yeah,
around, activates. So if
yeah.
you array those speakers, and let's say that scene comes up, does it still invoke the object to
Oh
independently
yeah.
pass through it? Okay.
Well, to pass from, if you look at the bottom of this diagram, from left wide to LS1 to LS to LS2 to LRS1, LRS, LRS2,
Yeah.
um, all of that will work. Now, the way this is designed with all the extra speakers, because we're also doing commercial cinema Atmos, um, a lot of those signals are going to be doubled up across two speakers or
Yeah.
three speakers, maybe. Um, or not, depending on what you want to do. You know, you the same the person. Okay, one of our dealers has a system that is almost this big. I mean, the room is this big. He doesn't have this many speakers, but the room does seat 30 people, and this is in his home.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, he brings customers there to show them what's possible and so forth. But most of the time, it's just him and his wife, you know,
Yeah.
watching a movie, and they're sitting, you know, in the front row or wherever they like to sit. If I were in that position, I would create a preset that is really focused on just those two chairs,
Yeah.
and then a separate preset for, you know, the Super Bowl or family night or whenever you think you're going to have a bunch of people.
Gotcha. Yeah. I do the same thing. Sometimes I'll have a preset for the front row, then one for the back row.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we have a lot of people who do that. We also have different presets often for music and movies,
Yeah.
because a lot of people listen to music on these systems. I mean, if you're going to spend all the money on all these speakers and presumably really nice speakers, you know, it seems like you should use them for more than just movies, concert videos, or just listening to CDs and maybe with an up mixer. I mean, it's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Um, so just to try to summarize a little bit, you know, how do you choose one or the other? You know, your first choice is analog or networked. And one really important point that I don't think I've made yet is that the Altitude CI doesn't have any analog inputs, none.
Mm. Mm.
So if you do have
Yeah.
some legacy, you know, you got that old cassette deck, so you can play music mixes from the '80s, or you know, whatever it might be. Maybe you've got a turntable with an outboard phono preamp. If you need even just one pair of stereo inputs, you really need to go looking at the Altitude 16 and Altitude 32, which, you know, we are beginning to think of those as sort of the um, for want of a better term, the hi-fi versions of the altitude, as opposed to the networked and consumer integration versions of the altitude.
Mm.
Um, Either way you decide to go, analog or networked, the Amplitude 16 is ready and waiting for you, and you can use as many as you might need um, with the CI. With the Altitude 32, it maxes out by itself at a mere 36 channels. Um, and with the 48 extension that Shane mentioned earlier, you can go to a total of 48 discretely rendered channels and a total of 64 output channels. And the reason why those two numbers are different is that, you know, you might have very sophisticated bass management where you have a lot of subwoofers. You might have a lot of biamplified or triamplified systems, so you're just using up, you know, two or three or maybe four outputs for just one channel of information. So you can get yourself in a position where you need those extra channels pretty quickly and easily
Yeah.
in an ambitious system, and particularly with really high end speakers. So in terms of the decision tree, you know, we just threw this together again. Frankly, mostly for our dealers, but it applies to all of you too, to help them kind of figure out, you know, what do I need to do and how do I make all these decisions. So I'm not going to read the table to you. You guys can do that. One thing to note is that um, the CI only has 4 HDMI inputs instead of 8. Um, Not many people need more than 4, but some people do. And in big residential installations, there's usually a whole house HDMI matrix switcher like the Crestron NVX or Savant has theirs. I don't remember the model number. There are a variety of these, and they provide sort of all of the house sources to the entire house. And presumably, one feed would come from that matrix switcher, and then you'd have three more inputs for local sources: your Apple TV, your Kaleidoscape Strato, your Blu-ray player, whatever. So, if you do need more than four HDMI inputs, another reason to look toward the other guys. And more examples. The CI does all of its processing in the same way that the 16 and the 32 do, meaning it does all of its processing at the native incoming sampling rate. So if you're playing a 2496 recording, we're doing all of our signal processing at 96 kilohertz. Um, Everything else in the market has to down convert that to 48 kilohertz because that's what the DSP chip that they're using knows how to do. So if you have maybe a significant library of super high res audio files that you bought from HD Tracks or Chesky or someplace like that, um, then there's another reason why you might want to stay with an analog configuration, because if you're using audio over IP, you must match whatever the network is expecting from you. So this is usually 48K, although it can be configured for 96 and so forth. But it's always just one frequency, at least so far as I know. And we will still do all of the native rate signal processing to retain all of that high frequency information for as long as possible. And if you use the analog outputs or the AES CBU digital, kind of conventional digital outputs of the CI, we will give you that 96 or 192 kilohertz result of all of our processing. But through audio over IP, it kind of has to go down to the lowest common denominator that everything else on the system that knows how to speak Dante or AES67 understands, right? Otherwise, you're not going to get anything. Um, so the final output has to go through sample rate conversion in order to match what the network needs. And, we understand that might be a deal breaker for some people, which is why we want to be really clear about it. Also, I mentioned this earlier, but when considering the CI, consider the incremental cost of the new audio over IP equipment that you might also have to buy, because it's not nothing. So I think that's the entire presentation, and it ran a little bit longer than I had hoped.
That was good. Good info.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the questions because it makes it so much more interesting for me.
So
I did a webinar yesterday. It was just me talking and nothing, and it was this is much more fun. Thank you.
So then the 32, so that will not be getting any form of Dante or anything like that in the future.
Oh, that should have been in my presentation. No, there will be a free software update that will include the Ravenna AES67 code. And because that's all done in software, and we have a powerful PC that can run the software. So the 16 and the 32 will get AES67. But the only way of doing Dante is, or at least doing it right, would involve new hardware. And so we'd have to charge for it.
Right.
The But oddly enough, both Dante has an AES67 compatibility mode, and AES67 has a Dante compatibility mode, but they only go so far. Um, for example, the Dante AES67 compatibility mode, it's not sufficiently compatible to be able to be used with that Dolby gear in a DCI system. It's more limited than what that gear needs. So there's that too.
And what is Ravenna?
Ravenna is the software. It's an open source software implementation of AES67. And AES stands for Audio Engineering Society. This was, 67 was the number of the project, but it was basically, let's come up with a universal way of doing audio over IP. Whereas Dante was invented by a company, Audinate, from Australia back in 2006, and it is hardware based. You buy Audinate chips to implement it, and the only way of getting everything that both have to offer is to do both natively rather than doing just one of them as a bolt-on to an existing product.
So the 16 and 32, you could do the audio over IP with just the LAN cable with this update. Is that what I'm understanding, or no? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
with the understanding that it's AES-67 and not Dante, so it is going to
Yeah.
be a bit more complex.
Okay.
But it's free. There's a lot to be said for that.
Was that coming with the future new update that's coming next year? The next firmware update, or
Um,
later on down the road? Down the road.
it's a software update technically, and the difference is probably not worth worrying about. But it will be a free software update. I anticipate, sometime early next year, but I don't know exactly when.
So that way we can use the
They're
new
working on it
Amplitude.
already, but it's not finished. So
So
yeah,
then one cable connection from the 16 or 32 into the brand new Amplitude 16 with the new board.
I believe so. Although I haven't actually asked that question, but that's a relatively simple use of Dante. So I'm
Mm,
assuming that AS67's Dante compatibility mode is good enough for at least that, because otherwise, what are you compatible with?
yeah, gotcha. What are the questions? I had a couple of ones from Patreon. So audio quality, I think you kind of touched on this earlier. So there is no real advantage audio quality wise from the CI over to 32 or 16. Like they'd be the same. So this is not
Yeah.
like an upgrade, more like
Well,
just a lateral type of move.
yeah, it's definitely a step off to one side,
Yeah.
not an upgrade or a downgrade. But there is one reservation I have about that, and that is that most of the audio over IP amplifiers that are available nowadays
Yeah.
were designed specifically for concerts, live concerts and roadies and stuff like that, where the emphasis was on being able to set everything up really fast and have a ton of power
Yeah.
because, you're Pink Floyd and playing at 140 dB or whatever it might be. So, and most of the consumer versions of audio over IP amplifiers are really just rebadged pro amps, different faceplate or whatever, but it's a pro amp, and it not the emphasis is not necessarily on the lowest possible noise floor.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
whereas the amplitude, our amplitude amplifiers are specifically designed to have the lowest possible noise floor, particularly when used in combination with our gear. Um, so that is a potentially significant difference.
Yeah.
Your mileage may vary, but um, let me come back into, let's see, where are you? There we are. I need to share a different window, so if you'll
All
bear with
right.
me for a moment. Come on. Okay. And where is it? I have so many windows open. I was trying to close them earlier. Tell you what, let's try to do it this. There we go. We'll do it that way. Okay, so are you seeing a new interface?
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so this is not going to be a comprehensive tour because anyone who's familiar with the Altitude knows that we give you there are just more tools in your toolbox than any other surround processor. And in the past, I think it's pretty well organized, but there's just a lot to it. And there are times when, if you want to go from here to there, it's like 5 or 6 different clicks,
Yeah.
and it's not that hard. But you need to remember where stuff is and kind of know your way around. One of the goals we've been working on this new user interface, not only for the CI but for everything, in not just residential products, but for our pro products as well and our commercial cinema products. Um, all Trinnov products will look pretty much like this going forward. Um, And one of the goals here was to make sure that as you're going along and just whether you're configuring it or calibrating it or just using it on a day-to-day basis, if you need one of those more advanced features that most people don't probably ever need, it's just one click away. So you can see the little gear icons. That's a couple of things, but this is not actually the screen that you see when you first buy a unit and open it up. Just as a quick overview, the idea here is that you select your source on the left side. In the middle, we're telling you what we're doing with it. So is it Dolby Atmos on True HD or Dolby Digital Plus? And if it's listening to a CD, it tells you 44.1 kilohertz, and you have all these up mixers you can choose from and so forth. And then the output is on the right-hand side, and I'm not actually connected to anything right now, so that's pretty boring right now. But there'll be information there too. And then up here, when there's content playing, you can see the meters that you're perhaps used to seeing. The source meters, of course, above the sources side, and the output meters for what's going to the speakers on the output side. So everything is still there, and there's also this little representation. Oops, hello.
Hey.
My trackpad is a little bit more sensitive than I had planned. But there's a 3D representation of the system, however you've configured it at the time, and you can change presets just like you would do on an Altitude today. This is still beta software. You can see the dev just underneath the volume control developer version of the software. But you can change, and if you notice, come on. There we go. Trying not to make it spin because my sensitivity is cranked up too high. You can reconfigure the entire unit on the fly with a click, just as you can with the existing 16 and 32. And then all of the information you might need is up here. But when you first get the product and open it up, what you see is this. Because there are no presets. So the first thing you have to do is create a preset that explains to the Altitude how you want to make use of it. What speakers do you have? How do you want to use them, and so forth. And there's a little dramatic foreshadowing at the bottom here, network, volume, and so forth, to tell you kind of what's coming up. But let me hide this. Did I just hide everything?
No, I can see it.
No, okay. Your window came to the front. Okay, so first open up the system. You see this, Gandalf and all. And the very first thing that we ask you for is the dimensions of your room. Now, at this point, we don't really need to know the dimensions of your room, but if you decide to do waveforming a little bit later in the process, we will need the size of your room. So let's do the room I'm in, and you've seen this room, Shane. Fortunately, for those of us on this side of the pond, we can use feet and not just centimeters. Yes. My apologies to all the metric people in the world. Yes, we know it makes a lot more sense. This is just what we're used to. So room width here is 17 feet. Room length is 23 feet. Room height is 11 feet. Notice they're all prime numbers. That was just a cheap and easy way of getting the job done and minimizing standing wave issues. And the screen is, I think, 12 feet, if I remember right. So,
screen width. That's new.
Yeah, well, and that's mostly used in these graphics that you can see over on the side. Because we're trying to make it look at least, somewhat. It's a visual aid. Yeah. It's never going to look exactly like your room, but we're trying to make it look somewhat like your room. So now you've told it how big your room is. Hopefully that was not terribly hard. And let's say we want to do that 9.4.6 system that I was talking about earlier. Well, the easy way to do that would be to start at something that's kind of close. And then in this case, I just need to add 3 more subs. So click, click, click. And we've configured the system.
You know what I never got? The old way of doing it. There's like Dolby Atmos and Dolby Atmos Narrow. Like what's the Narrow?
So That was actually Trinnov narrow, if I remember right. We might have both. The original idea of that was that for people who aren't using projection TV and instead are using, a 65-inch direct view or something like that, one of the things that we feel fairly strongly about, and which RP22, the industry effort to standardize immersive audio design with best practices, um, one of the things we agree on is that the size of the image that you're looking at and the size of the image that you're hearing should be about the same. They don't have to be super precise, but they should be roughly the same.
Mm.
And we were thinking that, in a normal size room, if you only have a, 65-inch TV like I have at home, the edges of the screen are way in here. It's not out there.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
we came up with a variation on speaker placement that was designed to accommodate that situation.
Okay.
Uh, I mean, we'll figure it out when the 3D microphone figures out
Yeah.
where all your speakers are. But that's where it came from originally.
There
So
we go.
we have a 9.4.6 system defined. And now the next question is, do you need to biamp or, triamp or quad amp any speakers? If you do, we're going to have to allocate more outputs to
Mm.
that speaker. But let's keep it simple. We're just doing mono amping. And let's say in this case, I'm using the Amplitude 16 with the Dante card. So most things are going to be Dante. So I just tell it, start with Dante everywhere, and we just arbitrarily, add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those can all be changed as well. If you, for some reason, want to use a different Dante channel, you just have to tell us what you want us to use.
Mm.
But then you get down to the bottom of the list, and here are my subwoofers, and they probably don't know how to talk Dante. So I'm going to drive them with 4 of the 8 analog outputs.
Do any of these outputs change from what you have right now? Like, should I write down what channels are in what output?
It'll be here still. I mean, if you want to come back, maybe I'm not understanding your
No,
question.
like my setup right now, because I'm gonna have to start all over again when you get an update. So instead of like trying to figure out what channel is my left channel on, you can just is that output going to change at all?
You can make it be anything you want it to be. So I would suggest either writing them down
Yeah.
or
Okay.
taking a couple of screenshots of your
Yeah.
existing system, because that way you'll at least know that, you know, this Amplitude 16 that I've now inserted a Dante card into, its output number 1 is going to my left speaker. Its output number 2 is going to my center speaker, or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Okay. So it
Um,
stays the same. Okay.
but once you tell us how you want to make use of all the various options, you can also tone out the system with pink noise to make sure that you got everything right and everything is going to where it belongs. If you have speakers that require parametric EQ, that's right here, so you can prep the system for those speakers prior to measurement. And now we've done the entire configuration of the system. You can give the preset a name. We just do a timestamp by default, but you should probably name it something that you will remember. I'm not going to make this the starter preset because I'm just creating it for show and tell. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're finished with configuration. Hasn't been calibrated yet, but
Yeah.
if you wanted, for some reason, I don't recommend this. If you wanted to go and listen to it, the calibration's not right, the optimizer hasn't been set up, but at least all the sounds are coming from where they're supposed to come from.
Yeah.
What most people will probably do is to then go from configuration to calibration. And what I'm going to do here is, so this is just telling you that we're ready to go. Now, you'll notice that I'm not connected to these two things. And so it says microphone not detected. And I have to turn it this way. And as soon as I plug it in, come on. Oh, I got it upside down. So it's plugged in now. And already it's read that this is version 10, serial number 1325. And we've already downloaded the microphone calibration file for this particular microphone. So we're ready to to start taking measurements and make the magic happen. So we click the next button. some graphics in case you're not familiar with the 3D microphone. We're explaining to you what it's all about and kind of where you should put it. You can do a single point measurement, which often gives you really great results. Or you can do a multi-point measurement if you have a larger seating area and you want to make sure that the goodness is spread around and shared. So we'll click the next button, and now we're going to just sort of rough in the system. The idea here being we're going to play pink noise through each of the speakers. And if they're anywhere close to each other, within, say, a 10 dB range, you don't really have to worry about this. But every once in a while, including the room that I'm in right now, there'll be a huge disparity between some of the speakers and other of the speakers. So in this room, the screen channels are, ready for this, 117 dB sensitivity
Yeah.
or 2.83 volts in. That's crazy efficient or sensitive. The other speakers in the room are what normally would be considered pretty high sensitivity, and they're around 95, I think. I don't know exactly. But you can see there's already like a 20 dB difference between the quiet ones and the loud ones. And by the time I turn it up loud enough so that the quiet speakers are giving me a nice clean measurement that I can count on, the loudspeakers are going to be so loud that I don't want to be in the room or anywhere close to it. So, in order to, spare yourself from that, and depending on the speakers, that might be loud enough to potentially damage the loudspeakers. So you can kind of level the playing field a little bit on this page, um, and by starting the pink noise. Well, you know what? Actually, I'm going to quit that because I'm taking too much time here. So anyway, you can rough it in using the levels on a channel by channel basis. And once it's close enough for government work, just let the optimizer do the rest. We also are introducing a calibration level that is completely separate from your volume control. And you'll like this, Shane. With the 16 and the 32 with the current software,
Mm.
you'll remember that when you calibrated the system, the first step was to just go through with the test signal with all the speakers and turn
Yep.
the volume up until all the speakers were loud enough to give us a good clean measurement.
Yeah.
And then if you go back to recalibrate 2 months later for some reason, you have no recollection of what that level was. At least I don't. So here we're introducing the idea of a separate calibration level, and this will simply, stay wherever you put it, um, and it'll stay there waiting for you when you come back.
Oh wow.
So
Cool.
unless you
Okay.
changed all your speakers and have to start over from scratch,
Yep.
you're already where you need to be. So
Very nice.
next, do you want to do a multi-measurement calibration or a single measurement calibration? Just to save a little time, I'll say single.
Yep.
But I do want to show you the waveforming part of the wizard. So let's go on and do that.
Yeah. Finally, this was like the most confusing thing to figure out first time around.
Oh man, you're gonna love this, Shane. You are really gonna like this. Um, so again, we give you, pretty pictures to give you an idea of where the thing should go and how it should be oriented. And, in this case, there's only one measurement there because that's what I told it I wanted to do. Um, and you can press the calibrate button, and as the microphone figures out where the speakers are going to be, I can't do this live because it's not actually connected to
Yeah.
anything. But the speakers will show up on this graph, which is very much like things that you've seen before in the current software. So once you get done with that, you move on to the waveforming part of the process,
Very nice.
and you tell us which of the subwoofers that are emitting sound, which are the ones that are absorbing sound. You can again tone them out using the noise generators just to make absolutely sure you haven't confused analog output number one with, I don't know, analog output with three. And the little thing on the right hand side is just a visual aid to give you an idea of what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. So very briefly, and this is a terrible oversimplification, but we emit the sound from the front of the room in such a way as to create as controlled a wavefront as possible, and that controlled wavefront minimizes or even eliminates the sidewall, floor, and ceiling reflections. And then when it reaches the back of the room, most of that energy is absorbed, and it's absorbed quite effectively. If any gets reflected, and there'll always be a little bit, what's left over is cleaned up by the front speakers. So the emitter speakers are actually doing both emission and absorption. The absorber speakers are simply absorbing maybe 95% of the sound that reaches them. Because what you're trying to avoid is all that reflected energy. It's the reflected energy interfering with other reflections and with the direct sound that introduces standing waves in the first place. If you could avoid that reflected energy, there are no standing waves. Even if you had a room that was cubical, which would be the worst from a standing wave point of view, with waveforming, it will still work great because we're absorbing the stuff that's making the problem. And this is where you're really come on. There we go. It was a bit slow to jump past it. Here we go. So you can, show the distances between these things. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And of course, you can move this around too. But we're giving you basically a 3D map of where we think you might want to put the microphones when you're measuring for waveforming. And the goal here is to capture as much information about what's happening in 3 dimensions in the listening area with as few measurements as possible, because although you're only measuring the subwoofers, so it goes fairly quickly, it's just deadly boring. And because it's boring, you can pretty easily kind of lose track and say, wait, did I do this one already? So here we give you a suggestion, like just start here at the ear level, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the upper level of 8 through 10. And you'll notice that they're staggered between upper and lower. And it's also staggered as it moves from left to right.
Does it tell you distance and height between each one?
Yeah, the goal is to have the measurements be no more than a meter apart from each other.
That's cool.
So you can show the measurements or not. It gets kind of cluttered unless you make it really big. You can zoom in as far as you want to go.
Yeah.
You can also do things like showing the boundaries where you should not do any measurements. So in this case, the little sort of red area,
right,
that's too close to the walls. So you just need to stay away from that stuff. And up here, you'll see that we copied forward the measurements that I put in earlier, and we've already converted it to metric. But, it's the same thing. And because waveforming needs that both to make this suggestion for how many and where the measurements should be, and also to then map out the room and make a suggestion as to where they should be, not just how many there should be. So you go through on the next page, and you're like, okay, and again, you have this thing here available in case you get confused. We can, let's spin this. Come on. There we go. I just want to tilt it a little bit so you can see all of them. So ear level measurement number 1, if I hover over that, it changes to yellow and says, yeah, why don't you measure this one? And then the next one and the next one. And so it keeps track of what measurements you've done and what measurements you haven't done for you.
Nice.
And it gets even better because when you, let's say you're looking at the graphs later, and you see that one of the measurements is just kind of funky and doesn't look anything like the other ones. And you're wondering, it might be legit, or maybe I screwed up. Maybe I did something that spoiled the measurement. Well, if you come back here, in the graphs, it'll tell you that it was measurement number 6 that looks funny. So I just have to come down here and find measurement number 6, and it reminds me that, that's the one in the back right-hand corner.
Right.
So that's the one I need to do over and replace.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. And, we haven't done the measurements yet because nothing's connected, but that's it. Wow. If I click the finish button now, it would be done. I'm going to click the exit button since we weren't able to actually do that. But
yeah, you Trinnov non-Trinnov owners don't know how much of a big difference this is compared to what it used to be.
a number of people have been working on this for years, but the guy who's in charge of this project used to run our technical services department for like years. And so he's intimately familiar with the kinds of things that caused confusion.
Mm.
And he also happens to be really good HTML uh, guy, and all this entire interface is in HTML. So it's very easy. Any modern browser could look at it.
Yeah.
Again, I suggest that you use the Trinnov app because it's just easier. It You don't have to learn what the IP address is or any of that stuff. You can just say that's the one I want.
So is that now right there in the bottom? Is that the object viewer now?
The object viewer is actually elsewhere. I don't remember where it is. I I think it's under decoders, but I'm not sure. Not all of this is done yet.
Mm.
Most of the interface is done, but there are places where the interface hasn't yet been connected to the software in the back end that actually does the work. So that we'll be finalizing all that stuff, and we're starting with the beta testing already. Um, we hope to ship these in November.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
it'll take us a little while to do all the testing. And then it also takes a little while to get all the certifications because it's a brand new product and it needs to be certified by Dolby and DTS and all those guys. It also needs to be certified and tested by Underwriters Laboratory and CE and all the safety kind of places, and all that takes time.
Yeah.
And all of it's beyond our control. So if everything goes as planned, we should be able to ship these in November. But any one of those things could have a really long line that we have to wait through. I don't really know. It's somewhat beyond our control. The
Gotcha.
hardware is completely done. We've already built over 100 of these things. There are another 150 being, a batch of 150 of them being built now.
Gotcha.
The hardware has been done for a little while, but this is a huge undertaking on the software side. Maxime has been working on this for I think somewhere between 3 and 4 years, and
Mm.
this is his whole baby at this point. And but every 6 months or so he would do a presentation for those of us who are helping customers and dealers and distributors and so forth, and he would get feedback from us on what we thought was great and what we thought might need to be tweaked or whatever. Um, and there are a few places in here where something was lost in translation between French and English, and we have to clean up that stuff. But you know that's easy. Um, oh, one other thing I should probably point out: the lip sync adjustment is right on the front page where you spend most of your time. Um, so if you are in a situation where you're watching a movie that's in English, but you're getting that kind of foreign film overdubbed weirdness because
Mm.
the video and the audio are not synced up with each other. Um, some of that will be because everything has latency, and so like for example, we have a Mad VR NV Extreme over here in the rack, um, which does a whole lot of video processing. And because it's doing so much work on the video side, I think it has about a 230 millisecond latency. So one of the things that is in the current altitude is you just tick off the little checkbox that says, automatic latency adjustment or something like that. But you check the latency box, and the equipment will all talk to each other. And based on what the altitude hears from your display device, and in this case, the Mad VR, and anything else between this and the display, we will simply fill in the amount of latency that's needed to make things line up. But there are also differences from one program to the next, one channel to the next sometimes. Um, if you have the option of not becoming really sensitive to lip sync issues,
Yeah.
take advantage of it
Yeah.
because it'll make you crazy if you start fixating on it.
Yeah.
But some people just can't not hear it. So we've tried to make it easier for those folks to solve the
Yeah.
problem.
My Apple TV every once in a while goes out of whack. I don't know why it does it, but it drives me
Yeah.
crazy. So is the VNC portion of the old interface, is that still here, or is that all intermixed together now?
Well, so as of right now, you could still do it the way you've been doing it all along,
Yeah.
but we're going to transition to a place where only the Trinnov app is supported. And that's partly for practical reasons and partly for support reasons. I mean, it's just so much easier using the Trinnov app.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I download. So again, you can go to our website for the desktop apps for either Mac or Windows. If you go to the resources tab on the main page of the website, and then under the resources tab, there's I think it's actually labeled Trinnov app, but there's a download section,
Yeah.
and you'll get there right away. So that's for either Mac or Windows, and then for your phones, the Trinnov app is already in the App Store or the Play Store, depending on what kind of phone you have. Um, we've already been through all of the Apple certification and all of that stuff, so everything's good.
Very nice. Okay. Yeah, I have one of the apps on my iPad, but I guess that's maybe different than what you're talking about.
Well, so the iOS app works. It basically has the same functionality, even though it looks different because obviously the iPad has more space to
Yeah.
do stuff. Um, but on whether the iOS applies to both phones and the iPads,
Yep.
and then Mac OS is obviously for Mac computers.
Gotcha. Okay. I didn't know there was one for the Mac. What else? Oh,
Yeah, and the laptop ones are what you're looking at now. It's the entire interface.
so when this new firmware update comes out with the new OS, does that include all of the new audio codecs, such as the brand new Dolby Surround? Are we going to get the new Surround Up mixer?
Wow, you really did your homework. Yes, it
Hey.
does. So the latest and greatest version of the Dolby Surround Up mixer takes advantage of the wide channels,
Finally.
whereas for some reason before it didn't. I have no idea why. Um, but we knew we were working on this, and we were trying to minimize the number of changes. So we've held off a little bit so we could do it all at once. And because I think it's going to make things simpler ultimately for both customers and for our tech support people.
Is that also going to, so if you have a Disney movie, it's only got the two top channels. Is that going to upmix to all six or whatever you got? Eight?
So as of right now, if it's Dolby Atmos or DTSX Pro,
Yeah.
if it's either of the object-oriented formats, as I understand it, I haven't actually read the contract, but as I understand it, we are contractually obligated to do what is in the recording without any further, subsequent processing. Now, we had to get a special exception to do the optimizer, which, you know, obviously happens after it's been decoded. But it's not an up mixer; it's just fixing speaker and room problems. So that was relatively straightforward. But they really don't. I think probably the thing they're most concerned about is, what is it going to sound like if it's a Dolby Atmos soundtrack and somebody decides to use the Neural X up mixer on it. And they want to understandably preserve the intent of the people who designed the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So maybe that'll change at some point, but that's my understanding of what those two are doing. For anything else that's like a 5.1 or 7.1 or just normal stereo, all of these upmixers should be explored.
No,
I use Aura 3D for music, but they're all good.
because I know for DTS, if you're just watching DTS X and it's 7.1.4, and you have 6 heights or 8 heights, you turn on Neural X. Neural X will upmix
Yeah,
DTS, but it won't upmix Dolby. But so will the
right.
Dolby Surround upmixer upmix regular Atmos to all
I
the
don't
extra
think
heights.
so.
No.
I don't think so, but I could be wrong on that. I haven't asked that question. But at least as of right now, it never has been able to. And if that's changed, I
Gotcha.
don't know about it.
Okay. That's semi bummer then. Okay. Here we go. We got a couple questions here.
Well, so the answer to your question, your implicit question, what do I do when I only have two channels of information, but I have,
Yeah.
four or six or whatever, however many channels up above me? Um, it's pretty simple to create a preset,
Oh
which you
yeah,
can label,
yeah.
for Disney or something like that, and just array the two channels that Disney gives you into more than two of your upper speakers,
See,
and
I'd
we will automatically,
I'd much rather
yeah,
have Dolby do it for me.
well,
Yeah,
yeah, I get it,
yeah,
but it's not rocket science. It's
yeah.
it's pretty quick and easy.
When can we expect to be able to upgrade our current Altitude 16s to the new software for those of us who are happy to recalibrate and set up our systems completely?
Um, I don't have a firm date on that at this point, but my expectation is it'll be early next year. Um, and again, it's going to be dependent. It's already being worked on. It's not quite as far along as the CI iteration of this software, but it's not like we're starting over. It's not going to take a really long time, but we still have to go through beta testing, and all of that is, it's somewhat time consuming. So the first priority is to get this out and available, and then that's the very next thing on R&D's schedule. So sometime early next year.
Can CI take in Dante 2.0 or 5.1 sources and upmix them? Or is it more of a direct routing to speakers with the Trinnov room correction?
Really good question. Thank you for asking that. Um, one of the one of the really cool things about this, for example, that DCI example, which I realize is the opposite direction from what you're asking, but in the past, if you had a DCI system, there were almost like two separate systems, and you had to pick which one you wanted to use. And for example, you would have the optimizer for all your, kind of Blu-ray, Kaleidoscape, all that stuff through the Altitude. But then if you have a CP950 on the other side for your DCI content, all the CP950 has is basic parametric EQ. So you're getting a better quality source material, and you're actually getting less effective processing. So it's a compromise. One of the beauties of this, and I am coming back to your question, Elvis, is that you can take in any signal. By the time it comes in, if it's coming in via audio over IP, it's already been decoded into X number of channels to 5.1, whatever it might be. So at that point, we don't really care whether it's coming from a CP950 or what coming from your Ancient of Days CD player. Um, is if we have the different channels of information, we can then upmix them. Um, Now, I should probably qualify that by saying I don't know if we'll be allowed to upmix a Dolby Atmos for commercial cinema recording, but I'm not quite sure why he would want to. There's already more potential there than you probably have speakers for.
Could the Trinnov optimizer pass the sound in Atmos through the top speakers VOG, or Aural and Neural X upmixing must be used?
It's not the optimizer. The full name of the optimizer is the speaker room optimizer. So it's not an upmixer.
Yeah.
And now, in what is now known as the 3D view, where speaker declaration page, where you tell the altitude, um, you know, when you get this kind of signal, I want you to do that. Um, you can, for example, in this room, I happen to have a voice of God channel up there for Oro or DTS. But in a lot of rooms nowadays, you only have the Atmos speakers. If you have, for example, top left right, excuse me, top left right, top left middle, top right middle, you can array the voice of God channel into both of those speakers to create an image of the voice of God coming straight down on top of you. Um, and we'll even do stuff like reducing the volume of each of those speakers by the necessary 3 dB so that they add up to the right amount of sound. You don't have to think about that ever. We'll worry about those details for you.
Do you need the Dante controller when you only connect an Amplitude 16?
I asked that question just a few days ago. And although I don't understand why you would need to, I was told that you'll need to open. Dante Controller is just a free app. It's as uh, Christoph apparently knows, it's software, and it's free. And you go to the Audinate website and you can download it. But I was told that yes, you'll still need to have Dante Controller to configure things. What I don't know is whether that's for more complicated configuration or for pretty much everything.
Shielded Cat 6 cables required, I assume?
Yeah, I would use a high quality cable. Yeah, at least Cat 6, Cat 6E. Um, now they're up to what, Cat 8 now, I think. So yeah, as long as it's at least Cat 6, you're fine.
Oh, I know this would not be an apples to apples, but if I'm running an AV and amp 10 524, how much of an upgrade won't the Amplitude 12 be? AV?
Hmm.
He's probably got an AV 10
Uh,
amp 10, Moritz, I'm assuming.
yeah, no, I that
Right.
part I understood. I was confused a little bit by the how much of an upgrade won't it be?
Maybe will it be?
The negative here threw me off. Um, It's a big difference.
Yeah.
Our decode, and you've experienced this actually. I
Yeah,
think
it's a.
yeah. I don't know if you had the 10 or maybe an 8805 or something, but it's not a particularly subtle difference. We have people who have very basic, 5.1 systems, and until the CI, they've had to buy at least an Altitude 16 for their 5.1 system, which is a lot more money. So that's one of the nice things that I'm looking forward to with the CI, is that at for a simple system like what you described, it's not a ton of money compared to alternatives that are out there.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more. The decoding is better. The optimizer is night and day better. The base management is more flexible than anything you've ever seen before. You have the potential of using waveforming if you decide to do that at some point. Um, I mean, the list just goes on and on.
Plus, I'm positive there will be an AV 10.5 and AMP 10.5 probably next year. So when that new one comes out, you're going to have a little FOMO. You're going to sell your AV and AMP 10. You're going to sell it at a loss. Now you're going to drop more money in to buy the newer versions. Whereas if you just buy the Altitude 12 now, you're probably going to be set for the next decade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, as witnessed by the Altitude 32,
Yeah.
which is more than 10 years old and still the best processor you can buy. Period.
What are the quality of the DACs in those new modules?
Exact same DACs that we used in the Altitude 16 and 32, and all of our pro recording studio gear for that matter. Um, we, we we only do the one. It's an ESS Saber DAC. I don't remember the model number, but it's a truly balanced output as opposed to sort of faux balanced, which you often
Hmm.
see on less expensive gear. Um, I don't know what else to say about it,
Well, the
but
altitude
we worked very hard to make sure that the
it's good.
DACs in the Amplitude 16 sounded as good as the DACs in the Altitude 16 and 32.
So will the altitude require an all new calibration with the new software release, or can I upload my currently saved configuration?
Now, so thank you for asking. I mentioned earlier that you're going to have to start over. You'll need to do a whole new configuration and calibration. It doesn't take that long, particularly with the new software. But you can't recycle what you've already done, um, because the data structures that are underlying the whole operation have changed. Um, so what you might want to do is to do a few things like, if you have a target curve that you've been tinkering with and it's exactly the way you like it, save it. And you'll be
Hmm.
able to import the target curve. What you won't be able to import is all of your measurements and all of the other stuff. But you should be able to recycle things like a target curve that that you really like. And I would also, on top of that, I would probably just take a screenshot of the target curve, so that if I lost the USB stick that I had the backup on, I can still kind of do it.
Where is that going to be located in the new software? Like to input your own curve? Because right now you have to go into
Now
the.
no, it's well, I think yeah. Right. Is that screen still open?
Yeah.
There it is. It was behind your window. So that'll be. I'm sorry. What was your question again? I got too
Where
far
where
ahead.
can where can you find that section to input your own target curve? That
Okay,
area.
that'll be in the optimizer section here, and that'll be under the expert little toggle. So when you get to that part of the calibration process,
Uh huh.
you can just pick one of our kind of off-the-shelf target curves, which are there's no such thing as the perfect target curve.
Yeah.
We're just giving you a handful of target curves to help get you started and to show you just how powerful that is. Because, out of all of the tools that are available in an altitude, I think the target curve is the most powerful. And, it's the first place that I go if I want to change the overall character of the sound. Um, there, when you're at that part of the setup wizard, there's a little button, a little toggle up in the top right corner that says expert. And if you toggle that into the expert mode, then you have access to all of that stuff.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
actually, I probably should have showed that off um, because the target curve and the graphs, for that matter, is. Let me see if I have. I think there's data in this one. Some of these other presets were just things that we were doing this sort of demonstration at CEDIA, and they're just bogus presets. But if I load a preset that actually has data, I can come in to these are all the things that have to do with
Yep.
the overall sound of your system. But if I come into the optimizer, this first tab is nicer looking, but looks sort of
Yeah.
like that's in there now, where this is all the proprietary Trinnov stuff, and this is delay alignment and level alignment, which a $500 AV receiver will do on some level.
Yeah.
Uh, ours is more precise, but if you really want to hear the difference between with and without our proprietary technology, rather than turning everything on and off, you really should just turn this part off.
Yeah.
Uh, so to compare apples to apples. But then we get to the target curves. Ah, bummer.
Yeah. Well, we get it. Yeah, we get it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with comfort. I don't know if that's a typo or a mistranslation. So let's go to here. Apply.
Comfort. Did you spell that?
No, I didn't. I don't know what
Is it
I
typo?
suspect it's a typo. Left. Why? I don't know why. Is this not the? I thought this was the preset that I needed, and I don't know why this isn't working as I expected to.
Hmm.
Back
Yeah.
up and open it again.
I guess we get the idea though.
Well, yeah, it's a much nicer looking graph, and
Yeah.
you can do things like if you want to have just a linear, downward slope to account for what rooms do to speakers. You can just draw a line from here to there, and like click, and then click, and you have a nice straight line. You don't have to actually go through and move all those little control points. So we've improved the target curve rather substantially, and maybe it's under expert mode. There you
Yeah.
go.
Okay. There you go.
There's
Yeah.
that toggle that I was talking about.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, if I want a downward slope, I just do that, and then I need to drag in my trackpad.
Oh, I
It's not
see.
great.
Yeah. Very
So
cool.
you can drawing with a trackpad or a mouse is
Yeah.
like doing fine art with a bar of soap, instead of a pencil or something. But um, you can do whatever you want to do here, and this will also be where you can apply.
Hold on.
You
Bring it up.
can load target curves. So let's for example, let's look at the Dolby curve.
Is that
You'll
an
notice
actual? Is that an actual Dolby curve or is Some you just made up.
Well, I don't know because I didn't put it in there and I did not
Okay.
name it.
All right.
The engineers did, but to give you an idea that we're not all, always serious. This is also something the engineers did just because they knew it
Yeah.
would make salespeople crazy. I'm sure. So, you have a tilt curve, you have, music curves. These are similar to the kinds of curves that we give you sort of prefabbed. And this is also where you can choose anything you've already saved, and you'll also be able to save anything that you've created yourself.
Yeah.
And it'll show up right there.
Yeah. It looks way easier than trying to adjust it with your finger on an iPad.
Yeah. Um, and then the entire graphs generator, I'm not sure what the right word is so much nicer. Like you can see we've got a cursor here.
Yeah.
If you're wondering why this particular bump and is so different, you're
Yeah.
like, well, where is that exactly? And it tells you in the upper right hand corner. It's kind of centered on 156 hertz and it's 4.9 dB up.
Hmm.
That's where your cursor is right now.
Right.
Um, and you can slice and dice this in a bunch of different ways. You can have, all of the before curves on the top and all of the after curves on the bottom, or you can look at individual. The way it's set up right now, you'll notice up
Yeah.
here it's left, right. So now this is just the left speaker before and after, and that's just the right speaker before and after. Um, a lot of people don't appreciate just how powerful a measurement system the Altitude is, and we're hoping that some of just making it easier to see stuff like this
Yeah.
will help people figure it out.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So you guys definitely changed a lot of that stuff that was in the advanced setting. Made it look prettier.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Hmm.
for the CI, are the HDMI ports upgradable to 8?
I'm sorry.
For the CI, can you upgrade those HDMI ports to 8 instead of 4?
Oh no. There are only there are 4 holes in the metalwork for the inputs and 2 holes in the metalwork for the outputs, and that's all she wrote.
Is that an upgradable architecture at all? Like if there's a new version of HDMI to 3.1
Oh
or something?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The HDMI board is always separate and easily swapped out. So as and I think have you already done one of these, Shane? I don't
Oh,
remember,
upgrade?
but
Nah, I never
yeah,
needed to. So yeah.
it's literally just a board swap and then a software update, so we can teach the Altitude how to talk to what is new hardware. But it's dead simple. Um, Anybody who understands the necessity of electrostatic discharge precautions when you're working inside of flying electronics and so forth should be able to do this. It's just not. I mean, I can do it, for heaven's sakes. I've done it on customers' kitchen tables. So you need a static strap. You need to
Yeah.
pay attention to ESD, but it's not hard. Um, so yeah, and if you see, well, no, I would have to change what I'm sharing to go back to the presentation. But I was going to show you. If you go to the website, you can find under products, you'll see the Altitude CI, and there's a nice pretty picture of the Altitude CI. And if you click the little arrow that says there's more, if you click to one side or the other, you can see the back panel and see how it's organized. And all the HDMI stuff is right at the top, and it's a smaller board that's quite easy to swap out.
Hi, John Shane. How do you connect a traditional amplifier to the CI?
With the analog outputs, um, and if you have more than 8 channels that you need to do that with, you would have to buy external VDA converters. Because remember, the original idea of this piece was that it was going to be all digital. And we did add the 8 analog outputs for whatever you want to use them for. We were thinking partly, if people want to use it for a bunch of subwoofers for waveforming, they're probably going to need analog outputs. So we wanted to include those, but they're not specific to subs. You can use them for anything you want.
Big Jack says, will the audio delay be fixed in the altitude when codec change happens? Two, will the feedback pop that some people experience through the speakers when the relay click on codec change be fixed?
On question number one, I think you're talking about the audio video sync delay specifically, as opposed to like latency or lip sync mismatch. And that is something that we are actively working on for both, the 1632 as well as for CI. I believe it will be better. I don't think it's ever going to go away entirely. The reason, oddly enough, Shane and I were talking about this earlier. The reason that some processors from Denon, Marantz, Yamaha, whatever, the reason some of those processors switch as quickly as they do is that they're on their HDMI board. They have a scalar chip, so that no matter what comes in, what goes to the TV is always the same. And that means the TV, never seeing a change, never has to initiate another EDID handshake and HDCP and all of that stuff. We don't do that because in the part of the market we exist in, a lot of our customers, maybe today, maybe in the future, will want to have a Lumagen or a MadVR or some other video processor. And so our HDMI board is specifically designed to be bit perfect as far as video is concerned. It just passes it through. We peel off the audio stuff that we do such a good job with, but the video information just goes straight through with no change whatsoever. So every single time something changes, your TV will probably say, let me check to make sure everything is still kosher. And that just slows things down. So typically, unless there's some other problem in the system, you should have a audio video sync delay of like 3 to 5 seconds, give or take. And at the beginning of a 2-hour movie, who cares? When I first switch to Netflix and play something, I don't get the dun. I just get the dun at right now. And I think Netflix probably would have a problem with that because it's like a trademark thing for them. But the rest of us don't really care. If you're getting 10, 15, 20-second delays, there is something else going on.
Yeah.
And I have a short little white paper, for want of a better term, where I've collected some of the things that can be changed to make that go away. And right now it only includes the Kaleidoscope, the Strato settings, and Apple TV. We'll add other stuff as it seems necessary. But you should be able to get it down under 5 seconds. And if it's much longer than that, you should look at some of this white paper and also try different HDMI cables, because you would be shocked at just how variable they are, even from really reputable companies. Because for one thing, whoever designed the HDMI connector should be executed, in my mind. It's just awful. It has a lot of wires in a very small and relatively fragile construction, and it's just a problem. On your second question, the relay click is a little bit different than a pop, and it's not actually feedback. The relay, if for those of you who don't own an Altitude currently, we have relays on all of the analog outputs, and the idea is that we disconnect the analog output from what's going on inside the box until the signal settles down, because sometimes we get a dirty signal and we need to wait for it to stabilize before we want to start reproducing it, to avoid nasty kind of noises, stuff like that. So the relays on balance are really important, and I'm happy to have them there. What I'm a little bit perplexed by is some people, and I'm sure this is true, I don't know if I've ever heard it myself. Some people say that the pop also comes through the speakers, and to me that suggests that maybe the timing for the, actually, no, I just thought of something else it could be. Okay, so some amplifiers, based on the way the input stages are designed, really don't want to be disconnected and reconnected like this. And that's pretty much what the relays are doing.
Hmm.
Now, we're doing it specifically to avoid nasty noises that could otherwise be created. But depending on the input stage of the power amp that you're using, and maybe the sensitivity of your speakers, if they're really high sensitivity, so even a tiny little signal is reproduced audibly, yeah, it does happen. And I don't offhand, well, that relay question has now been moved into the Amplitude 16, because that's where the D-to-A conversion is done. So I don't know exactly how that's been handled on that board. I would hope that the problem has gone away with the CI, and we are working on changing the timing a little bit of those relays to see if we can uh, eliminate the oddball systems where this is happening.
Will Trinnov have oral Macs in the future?
Actually, Oromax is what, when you choose Oro 3D in that listening formats menu, it should actually say Oromax. But it has said Oro 3D ever since it was introduced in February 2015, and partly because in those days so few people had heard of Oro that it was more important to give them sort of the brand name than the specific upmixer or technology. But in this next version of software, we're also using the latest and greatest code directly from Oro. So if you're talking about a newer upmixer or something like that, that'll be in there too.
Does the CI have a different CPU than the current 1632? Can it handle more compute?
I have no idea. It can. The current one can comfortably do 32 channels. I mentioned during the presentation part of the thing that early next year we'll have a beefed up version of the CI with a bigger CPU and a bigger Dante board, so we can do as many as 64 channels if you need to, both input and output. Um, so that will be a bigger CPU. I don't offhand know which CPU they're using right now, but it's a multi-core Intel, processor, and over the years, those have gotten so much more powerful than they were when we, designed the Altitude 12 years ago now.
Hmm. Oh, it looks like Big Jack says I get the pop through my speakers. I had to put an XLR attenuator to stop it. 90 dB sensitive speakers, 26 Hypix gain amp.
There you go. That's a lot more gain than you need in the power amp. And that's why the XLR attenuator worked, because it probably knocked it down by, 10 dB. Kind of a lot of discussion. Our analog outputs are beefier than is typical in a consumer electronics product because we build everything to the pro standards because that's where we got our start in the business. So there are lots of ways of measuring in decibels. One of them is dBu. It's technically how many dB above 0.707 volts, and it's square root of 2. Don't worry about it. But it's not 1 volt. It's a little bit lower than that. So how many dB above that can you go before you run into clipping? And we can go to plus 18 dBu, and if you need to, actually, we can even go as high as plus 24. I'm not quite sure why you would have to go that high, but that is built into the box. For an amplifier that has roughly 200 watts of power, that means that there's already so much voltage available from the preamp that it doesn't need that much additional voltage gain to get to the point where the amplifier is beginning to clip, right? And the idea of, one of the reasons the Amplitude amplifiers, whether it's the 8 or the 16, are so quiet is that every time there's a mismatch between how loud your preamp could have gone versus how loud your amplifier could have gone before either reaches clipping. Ideally, you'd want those things to move up and to run out of gas at the same time. because if one starts clipping here and the other could have gone all the way up here before it starts to clip, all of this space in between the two, if that's 10 dB difference, that's 10 dB of signal that you really can't access because this is already sounding terrible. And that means you lose 10 dB of signal noise ratio. It's basic gain structure. It's really well understood in the pro business, and for some reason, the consumer business has never really figured it out. But 26 dB of gain is way more than we need. There may be preamps out there that need that much gain because they have a much lower output capability themselves. But
the Trinnov was
that's
what, 19.6 or something?
Well, it depends on the amplifier. It's relative compared to what the Altitude can give us. How much more voltage gain do we need to get to the point where the amplifier is at maximum power? And so it depends on what the power rating is and what the input sensitivity needs to be based on what the preamp can do. But in the Amplitude 8, it's 19 dB, and I think it's about the same in the Amplitude 16. It might be 1 dB different. But it's basically around 19 or 20.
I would guess
That's
he's probably
closer to what you want.
I guess he's probably getting a lot of hiss out of having 26.
Potentially. 90 dB sensitivity is pretty normal nowadays. Used to be considered high efficiency, but it's pretty normal for a lot of speakers nowadays. But 26 dB of gain in the amplifier is probably quite a bit more than you need.
Yeah. All right. Let's take one last question here. Any news about JBL EQ files don't need BSS processors between Trinnov CI and amplifiers?
I think you're talking about their their anechoic EQ, their AEQ settings. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about. But if that is what you're talking about, that's not going to be available on the Altitude because it's proprietary Harman intellectual property. And one of the reasons why they would like you to buy an SCP-75 or now an SCP-80, which for those of you who don't know, we are the OEM supplier of those products to JBL for the JBL synthesis program. It's essentially an Altitude 32 with a different faceplate and a few changes in software. One of the changes in the software is the inclusion of all that anechoic data that they got from their ginormous anechoic chamber in Northridge, and that belongs to them, not to us. So we can't include it in the Altitude.
Is there going to be a JBL synthesis CI processor?
I have no idea. It's not my job.
Secret.
We have someone else in the company whose main job has two jobs. One is working in product development broadly, and the other job is keeping the whole Harman relationship on an even keel and making sure that works well for everybody.
And before we go, what are you thinking? Like January time for this software update, or a little later?
Yeah. Well, let me say first quarter.
Okay.
And I'm based on what I heard at CEDIA, probably early in the first quarter, but snafus happen. Things are rarely early, and they're almost always late. It's just the way of the world.
And you're anticipating the CI shipping next month, November?
Yeah, we're in October now, barely. Sometime in November. Again, it's not entirely under our control because of all those certifications it has to get through before we're legally allowed to sell it with all those logos on it. But yeah, assuming the certifications go as they normally do, sometime in November. If it slid back into December, I wouldn't be shocked.
Okay. Well, all right, John. This was informative. Jeez. Went hardcore 2 hours.
Well, thank you, because this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, nice little walkthrough. A lot of new stuff with the UI. Tell you,
Yeah,
very good,
yeah. That
good information.
the CI is the culmination of, I don't know, 4 or 5 multi-year projects.
Yeah.
The UI being one part of it. Obviously, the various bits of the hardware another part of it, particularly audio over IP, because we had been working in the AS67 for years, and it took us a long time to get the Ravenna code to where we felt it needed to be. Um, and Dante, of course, we've been doing Dante since 2018, so that was a lighter lift. But we felt it was really important to include the native version of both,
Mm.
so that you could mix and match and solve problems. Um, you know, you, it's just a matter of using whatever flavor of output you need to use based on the other equipment that's in the system
All right. Big news.
or inputs. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, the question is for you guys: are you picking up an Altitude CI? Are you going to trade in your Altitude 32 or 16? Leave your comment down below and let us know. And if you have any more questions, leave them down there as well. I relayed them to John. I'll let John know, and then I'll get back to you guys.
If you
But
already own an Altitude 16 or 32, you really should think long and hard about whether it makes sense to sell it and lose money and then buy a new thing
mm,
and then realize that you have to buy a bunch of other things to really get more than 8 channels. And yeah, it's do your math and before you pull the trigger on anything, don't be rash.
yeah, lateral moves. We're not upgrading. We're moving laterally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks
And
for
even the
watching.
UI is going to be available both places. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Alrighty.